Hi, I'm Jesse Dillon. This is my co-host.
Hi, I'm Priscilla Cohen, and this is Jesse's Office.
Today we're talking to Dr. Troy Campbell, a social scientist with a focus on bias, persuasion, arts, and entertainment. He's a researcher at Netflix Insights.
And worked at Disney, Imagineering, Apple, and Comic-Con. His academic research received widespread media coverage in the New York Times, Wired, The Washington Post, Forbes, Huffington Post, and many more. But please, first, subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch this and more episodes, or subscribe to Jesse's Office wherever you stream your podcasts. And feel free to leave comments and reviews. Somebody who's going to respond whenever we can.
Yeah, more comments, you guys. We want to know what's going on.
Hi, Troy.
So how do you define a social scientist? Do you even consider yourself a social scientist?
I consider I think all these labels today are really getting blurred, right? Mm-hmm. So like are you a social scientist, behavioral scientist, a design psychologist, a psychologist, a behavioral economist, a neuroeconomist? So if you do actual neuro stuff, I think that is a specific thing. But I would say that at the end of the day, am a design psychologist. I do research about how humans think and behave in order to provide insights on how we design things.
So when you start with, because a lot of your work has to do with happiness, how do you set a measure for happiness?
So how do you set a measure for happiness? Well, so I think that in anything that you do all the time, you really need to define it, right? And so science is just really, really good when done right about defining it, right? Mm-hmm. So in some of my research, I'm defining happiness by self-reported joy or self-reported happiness in people experience, but other times I'm measuring happiness by sort of choice, and I wouldn't say that that's actually happiness. So like it's something different, but really important to, my clients that actually need to measure often in choice rather than happiness. And then other times we're doing meaning, but we're having people respond to questions about meaning. We're having people respond to questions about happiness. And we're just really clear on which variables we care about when we do it.
Sorry, but isn't happiness a fleeting, like how do you contain it, understand that it's, okay, I'm in my happy mode? I mean, I don't think I've ever been happy in my entire life, that for more than...
Yeah, I can attest to that.
It's true. Well, or, you know what I mean? Or if it is, it's like a fleeting thing.
One thing about me and in this discussion is I am an empirical psychologist and a designer. I'm not a philosopher, right? So I'm really about somebody coming to me and saying, I want to lead to this outcome, right? I want people to have a good time at my place and have positive feelings about my brand, or I want people to think more deeply about this issue, or I want people to be more inclusive in the workspace. And so a lot of what I do is really, you tell me the conclusion that you want. I'll use some ideas to help you think better about whether that's the conclusion that you want. But then I'm going to develop you the tools to get there. I think what I do is I do research on the most widely applicable skill and knowledge set you can have. So no matter what you do, if you are interacting with people or you're using your own head, you are using psychology. And the more you understand yourself and other people, it helps. And it helps with every single thing you do, right? All the movies that are being made here, when we have a documentary, we are using psychological principles, right? Because it's just how people think, how people behave, how people react to information. A simplified model of how I like to think of happiness-related outcomes is to actually break it down into 3 different outcomes. And again, this is going to be oversimplified, but it's a good place to start when designing. And that is, 1 is our meaningfulness. 2 is stimulation happiness, so that's like riding the roller coaster, getting real excited. And then 3 is carefree, sort of almost like an Epicurean thing.
That's the part I never had, the carefree one. Oof.
And I think that if you look at those 3 things, right, you very much probably have a lot of meaning in your life. You probably have a lot of stimulation, right? Even listening to a podcast can be very, very stimulating. But there's this other type of happiness that I think gets too mixed up with that stimulus, which is carefree. And I think that some of the best designers are really good at creating spaces in their experience for this carefree time. For instance, if we take Coachella, I have very mixed feelings on the Coachella Festival, but I think they are very good at doing all three types of happiness, right? You have Childish Gambino giving a speech about the meaning of life and what is, and talking about death on stage, right? Meaning. You have definite stimulation, right? With all these crazy shows and some DJ doing some crazy thing, but they also create this culture that you have this carefree time, right? Everybody's there for the full 3 days. You can't buy a pass anymore. You can't buy a day pass anymore. And so what that does is it creates this time between when you wake up until you're the first band you want to see, which might not be till 4 or 5 o'clock, where people are just really carefree and having fun and this relaxing time. And so trying to create all those different spaces when you're designing an experience, whether it's Coachella or Disney, is something that, I work on and think about. And
two things here. One is that you're talking about these spaces at Coachella, and then the other one, earlier in the conversation, you talked about consumers.
Yeah.
Right. So these are two sort of different ideas. One is one is a binary outcome, and one is a much more subjective outcome. So how are these two different parts of your work? Are they?
Yeah. And if you think about it, the subjective is very important because it's often very important to the binary outcome that we care about. Do people vote yes on the climate change policy? Do people show up to Coachella? Mm-hmm. And so understanding the subjective is very important to understanding the outcome that you want, right? And so I'll add a wrinkle in that is that lots of times things that we think lead to the outcome we think it does is not the actual subjective feelings that we want, right? That we have, right? So we might really like something, but we might not consume it a lot.
Well, give an example. Can you give an example?
So, for instance, if I think of my favorite band, The National, they have a lot of songs that I really like. But I have not listened to those songs as much as I have listened to some Maroon 5 songs. Because Maroon 5 I don't need any mental power to listen to it, right? And so there's these different situations, right?
Yeah.
And so what leads to certain outcomes is not always what we expect. And so science is doing good social science, especially applied social science, is this really crazy thing of being able to measure the subjective outcomes that you want to measure properly or as best you can approximate. And then understanding how much those actually predict the outcomes that you want. But then you also have to be thinking about the many different outcomes that you want. Because in any situation, whether it's getting people to go to Coachella or getting people on board with climate change stuff, it's not actually that you just want them to go to Coachella or it's that you just want them to vote yes on the climate change policy. It's that you want to also have them change their behavior. You want them to talk about things with other people. You want them to buy merch, whatever it is. And sometimes things that you do in certain situations can lead to one outcome very strongly, but not the other outcome very strongly. And so it's very hard to think about. And so really, I think that lots of times what people think of as science is they think of an actual model of like the academic scientist trying to figure out which filament will make the light bulb work the best, right? But as you know from your company, that's not how it's actually working, is that really it's a bunch of people sitting in a room thinking of so many different things and combining algorithms and intuitions to build outcomes out of those and repetition.
I was driving in today and, I happened to be listening to talk radio and you have, Jeffrey Epstein killed himself.
We think.
And well,
we don't know.
Okay, my point exactly, right? You just instantly have these incredible biases depending on your political, persuasion at the moment. So how do you think about this bias underneath all of this other stuff?
So we have these different psychological biases that we have. And so in research, I like to think of, my field likes to think of biases in two different types. And again, dichotomizing anything is oversimplifying, but here's the two different types of biases people generally have. One are motivated biases. They have something underneath them, a motivation. They want to believe that the person they dislike is wrong. They want to believe that they're amazing, right? A good motivated bias example is I remembered making a three-pointer and I was sure that I had made it in a game. We watched the film of it. I had not made it. I have never thought that anyone else has ever made a three-pointer in a game who didn't, but I did for myself. And then there's the other biases that we have, which our brain just goes wrong, right? We have certain prejudices. Our brain doesn't calculate numbers properly and stuff. And sometimes these are called motivated and cognitive biases or hot and cold biases. And whether those names are perfect or not, we need to think about both of these things.
For brands, are they trying to exploit these biases?
So if we have all these biases, they're interacting with each other all the time, right? And we also don't often realize how biases work. And so, for instance, we don't realize, I think, actually how confirmation bias works. So this is, as a researcher, I've been so excited to see my research and, the topics that I do research on talked about in the media, but they often get only one sentence, and people think, oh, well, confirmation bias is you see something that you see something, and whatever you believe, you just keep believing. But actually, confirmation bias is something more like confirmation process, and so it works kind of slowly and over time, and you can support or inhibit your confirmation process. So we know that one bias that really affects people in interviews is if they're a gender or a certain skin color, there are unfortunately biases against that. However, if the person walks into the interview and is just absolutely 100% amazing, oftentimes a woman or a man is equally seen as competent. But if the woman does anything that is slightly imperfect, that's when the confirmation bias starts going in, because it's a signal that happens there. And then on top of it, what we find is that once that kind of signal to this person who has this unconscious bias against women's competencies at this job, they will just be like, oh, I get it. And they'll go to the next question and they'll be cold. But if a man said the same thing, they would ask a follow-up question and they try and help them. And so that's just an example of how these things are really complicated, and I don't think we understand them all.
But let me ask you something. So what you're saying is a woman walks in for an interview, and she's doing a terrific job.
Yep.
And the interviewee is, really excited. But if there's a moment of doubt from the woman, or does it come from the like, I don't understand where the confidence gets.
So the idea is that we all have biases in our head, right? It's going to sound like I'm saying some horrible things, but I'm a scientist. I like to face the issue, right?
Okay.
We know that we have biases against women's competencies. We know we have biases against people who have black skin color in the United States. And what we know is if you see a black man in a Harvard sweater talking eloquently, and you see a white man in a Harvard sweater talking eloquently, the bias against the black man is not going to be as strong as if the situation was the person is wearing not as nice clothes, they're in a hoodie, and they say something a little bit wrong. And so once something could potentially confirm a stereotype, it happens. And so what you can think about it for those on the video is that it's this like steepness to the bias. So as a white person, you have to do so many things wrong before somebody's going to assume something horrible about you.
Yeah.
But as a black person or a woman or a certain situation, once you teeter off protection, you fall down the cascade to the confirmation. And that's really problematic, right?
So how do we, as a society, address this as a problem?
That it's going to take a long time, unfortunately. These are incredibly entrenched biases. They're in all of our literature that we read, and they're just going to be there at an often unconscious level, right? And so let's talk about how we could fix it in one space as a case example, right? So one of the spaces that we work a lot with, this consulting firm I work with called On Your Feet, is we go into all the big companies and help them do inclusion training, right? And what's cool about companies is I see that whether the CEOs and all the people at the top really care, so many of the people in the company themselves, the individuals who we talk with and do the trainings, so many of those people really, really care, right? We've done some trainings at Nike. those people really, really care. So many of the people there. And so how do we make that work? And so one of the things that we have so many biases, but the way that we reduce our biases largely is that we understand that if we stop and think and that we reserve judgment, we can fix a lot of situations. And we ask follow-up questions and help people prove their best selves, right? And so at least on a micro level, one of the things what we say is cognitively delay judgment, and behaviorally, if you have doubt in someone, ask them questions, help them to show whether or not they actually have that competency.
So it's a practice. So in other words, it's like exercises that you would do.
That word process. A lot of times people think that you talked about motivation. Somebody may want somebody to buy some merchandise, but when we're just people out in the world, maybe you don't start with that question, right? There's a process to get the person to the place where they might buy the Coachella T-shirt, right? So how do you think about the funnel that you're trying to drop people into when you're doing these consumer projects?
Let's switch from Coachella to my old employer, Disney. I used to be a Disney Imagineer, and I think Disney understands psychology from a lay perspective for the most part very well, though I have some criticisms of Little Mermaid and Star Wars Land, if we have time for that.
Have you been through them?
I have not been through Star Wars Land because I just got back to California, but I've seen all the pictures, and I just think there is a really misunderstanding of what people wanted out of that experience. It's a very apparently good experience, but it's this idea of having it on this galaxy's edge, and it's dirty, and it's very kind of Star Wars-y, but also Star Wars-y isn't really the cultural zeitgeist right now. A more firm criticism I think I can give of Little Mermaid is that the Little Mermaid ride violates the Disney ride principle of one ride, one emotion, because the idea is if you're in a short experience, to have a singular experience, we should have one ride, one emotion, right? So Peter Pan's the adventure ride, Snow White's the scary ride, there's some wacko rides, and Little Mermaid takes you through the whole story and does it in a way that doesn't have a singular experience and doesn't also create an experience that's unique and different from the actual story itself. And so it violates a lot of sort of the ride design principles that went into the original dark ride.
So what was your role as an Imagineer?
We did research on people's experience in the park. And so you can have the most amazing rides in the world, but if people don't make the right decisions in the park, they don't get to the rides and they have a miserable experience. Just like you could have the greatest scientific ideas in the world, but if you don't kind of lead people the right way to it, they won't act properly on it. And so we did some experiments in Epcot. And so Epcot is a really interesting space to do experiments because it's the most simple of all the parks. It's just a big ring around a lake, and there's a lot fewer things there in other places. But even in this very minimalistic situation, people make lots of bad decisions. They underestimate how much time it will take them to get someplace. And they also don't think about the fact that if they make a schedule and Fast Track breaks down, which unfortunately it does quite a bit, then their whole day is thrown off, right? And so what we worked on was the way to help people understand how to make decisions and to encourage people to go to different places of the park, which we thought would be better for them at certain times.
So what are when you say you're doing experiments, what are the experiments?
So Disney didn't have an official app for a while. I believe it was because they signed an exclusive contract like Starbucks did. And so they didn't have an app, and apps were a thing, but they didn't have an official app. So we worked on the prototype for the official app that would have messaging on it, have different pieces of information there. Somebody could be walking towards a ride. We know that wait time is going to be less in real time, and we can give them different pieces of information at that situation, and we can understand their likelihood to make a different decision based upon the information that we provide them at that time.
So is it only just sort of logistics, but is also what you might be interested, what you love, your own sort of pleasure points for how you're directing people, not just, okay, well, it's going to be a long wait over there.
So the method is sort of logistic, right? But the outcome is pleasure, right? And you often want to think also with people is, what is the idealized Disney experience for certain people, or what do we know if people don't go on, they will feel like they've missed or something like that. And so you can think about those experiences, right? When you do, you mix sort of like experimental data with qualitative data, and you interview people after their experiences. So many people's favorite things at a Disney park is actually just like a small thing that they run into. They love moments of serendipity. They love little cute things that they relate to. And it's not always that the best experience for someone is that they went on Space Mountain 3 times, Matterhorn twice, and Indiana twice.
Say they're experimental data versus qualitative data. What's the difference between these two measures? How are you defining these two things?
Yeah, so I kind of like to think of 3 different types of data. Again, there's way more than 3, but 3 different types of data for us all to think about is we have the experimental data, and that's, the academic's dream, right? You vary one thing versus the other thing. When we have an ad with a dog, does it do better than the ad with a cat, right? That's your experiment. If we tell people to start with the big ride, rather we tell people to start with a small ride, do they have a better day, right? And we do those things and we measure their choices and their self-reported enjoyment. That's the experiment. The qualitative data is more exploratory, right? And it doesn't always have to be, but so much of it is just asking questions and following up, right? And so since you can't always be measuring absolutely everything, qualitative data helps give you insights often to what you want to do for your next experiments or how you want to update your surveys, your third type of data, which is data that you have where you don't have experiments or you just get data of behavioral on Netflix or something like that. And then you run all your correlations. And so, for instance, whether it's Netflix or Disney that I've worked with, when we've done the qualitative experiments and we've interviewed people, there's always something that comes up that we didn't think to measure. Or there's a couple just incredibly strong emotional stories where we're like, oh, we did not know that thing had the possibility to resonate that much with people. Or we didn't know how just random some people's consumption of video is, and it doesn't have any sort of rhythm or rhyme for this seeming some percentage of people on Netflix. And so expecting consistency would be wrong. And those are things that you can't get if you are just asking people questions.
So that's, you're talking about anecdotal data, right? Where, so then how do you separate signal from noise in an anecdotal story? How do you even bring in a natural language, analysis of something and then, find correlation?
Yeah, so there are ways to analyze qualitative data that becomes very experimental or survey-like, where you have, word recognitions that track emotion and things like that. So all the people who scrape data, though I know they hate that word because that's not what they do, of Twitter and find those things, that is. But what I really love, so as a person who really at the end of the day loves the experiment, right? I'm an academic who loves to say, if I do this, does this happen more, right? I love establishing causality.
How accurate is self-reporting? Because I always find myself, when I respond to surveys, I do kind of censor myself. So
absolutely.
So how do you track that?
We are doing a survey, right? And we need to know what might lead this survey not to be accurate, right? So here are 2 very, very simple things that we always need to keep in mind. One is who might choose to opt out of giving feedback, right? So I was recently at the Shakespeare in the Park event, and I thought it was a very, very bad Shakespeare in the Park.
We won't ask where it was.
Yeah, and And I actually,
it
In
has
London.
to be, well, yeah.
Was it in England? No.
it was not in England.
Okay.
It was
New
in
York.
California.
It was California.
Shakespeare in the Park, like when people do Shakespeare wrong, they shout it, right, in that archaic thing. But Shakespeare is supposed to be chill, right?
Yeah.
Shakespeare actually doesn't sound that much different than Drake, right? Drake, she says, "Do you love me?" I tell her only partly. I only love my bed and my mama.
Iambic
I'm
pentameter,
sorry.
my God. You
Right.
know, it's iambic pentameter with the E at the end. I never had any idea.
Yeah. And so if you shouted Drake's lyrics in 100 years, somebody might do Drake's like, "Only love my bed and my," right. And so the thing was, I didn't like that it was historically
Yeah.
problematic and stuff.
Yeah.
And so I had lots of thoughts about it. And I also felt that they didn't explain the complicated plot to the audience. And so it took the audience about halfway through to understand it.
Which play was it?
Which one?
It was called A Comedy of Errors, and it has twins, but the twins are played by two different people, and so the audience is confused, and they're talking in that
Might have just
loudly.
been a really bad production. You know?
Yeah, it was bad in all the ways, right?
Yeah.
It was a bad production, and my literature PhD. Partner, she did not like it, but she didn't write anything in the comments. And I could see all these people who liked it writing things in the comments. And so I've always made it when I want to help people doing surveys, so I will write negative things if I feel negative things. And so there are many situations where people won't say negative things.
Yeah.
There's also another situation where people won't say things that seem politically incorrect. And I'm not exactly sure on if the data really turned out like this, but what some people have said is one of the reasons that people didn't think that Trump was going to win is that a lot of the data, people lied on the data that they were going to vote for Trump, but they thought it was politically incorrect to say it. And potentially in certain surveys, they weren't saying it over the phone. They were just putting it in on a form somewhere and no one could check their answer. The more honest they were in saying that they would vote for Trump. And so you can think about how in certain situations, right, you lead people to not be able to express themselves fully.
So now we're at another election, and we certainly see a whole lot of polling data if you go online. But why should we believe any of the polling data?
So with science, I'm a scientist. I think sometimes people think they come up to me and they're like they have something negative to say about a scientific method, and they're like, "Oh, I can't say this around Troy. He's going to be so angry that I'm criticizing science." I'm like, "No, I'm a scientist. I know how incredibly imperfect everything we do, and I know 15 different ways that it's imperfect more than you've ever thought, right?" And so if you keep those in mind, you can have better data, right? Another thing with polling data on television, and this can get into how much I hate news and the problematic thing of educational entertainment, is that lots of the polling data that comes out, the news doesn't treat it like a scientist would treat it, right? Because if the news treated it like a scientist or thing, we have a new poll that comes out. It's very small, so we can't really be sure if it's any different.
Right.
Over the next month, we'll be aggregating 15 different things and looking for differences in whether the poll was conducted over the phone or in person. And also, we'll be constantly doing demographics analysis, and not only considering what different demographics are thinking, but also the fact that different demographics show up to the polls differently. So a poll of the American population is actually not a legitimate poll of how the elections will turn out, because certain groups are more likely to go to it, right? If they said that, nobody would watch the news, right?
Right.
But that's actually what's happening.
You said something that I think the Trump's campaign was similar to Obama. And so what does that mean?
Yeah.
What is that?
One of my favorite phrases to teach in class is different blank, same psychology, right? So Obama campaign and Trump campaign, different ideology, some of the same psychology. And so the idea is, and we can get into this thing where we talk about how I think liberals don't understand conservatives, or at least don't understand who they are going with. I don't like that we have the word good in our language is used both to mean moral and competent, and respect is used both for moral respect and just respecting talent, right? So if you are playing basketball and you are playing against somebody who you absolutely hate, you think they're a terrible person, you've seen them off the court, they're a dirty player, but they can shoot a three-pointer, you still respect their competence, right? You respect their ability to do that, right? And I think that what liberals oftentimes do is they don't respect conservatives' abilities to influence the minds of people. They immediately dismiss something a conservative does as immoral or divisive without really taking the time to think, oh, that's why that's really effective, right? The worst thing that you can ever say is that's just racist because you've completely not understand the actual causal mechanisms. That's just racist. Well, it's coming from financial insecurity. It's coming from precarious masculinity. It's coming from an ununderstanding of the issue. It's coming from being inside an echo chamber. It's coming from the fact that they weren't taught as well as you were taught in college about causality, right? That's a lot of the things that are going on. So how was the Trump campaign and the Obama campaign sort of similar in the sense that the Trump campaign was more similar to Obama than Hillary in some way? So let's talk about the two phrases, yes, we can, and make America great again. Both of those phrases, while being absolutely amazing sonically, are also in a way inclusive. Now, obviously, make America great again has some derision to it, some divisiveness to it. But make America great again is Trump going up on a stage with a hat that doesn't say his name, right? His buildings say his name, but his hat says you person who feel overlooked, who had these skills that have been gone over. Let's make America great again and make you feel okay, right? Versus if we think about the two most popular phrases with Hillary Clinton, they are, I'm with her, which is about her and gendered, and basket of deplorables, right? Just that offhanded thing, right? So I'm with her, and she thinks that half of America or half of America is utterly deplorable. And Trump is very, like, lots of times what people say is that, like, Trump says really racist things or other things like that. And of course he does. But he says them in a way often that is more vague than you as somebody who has a PhD in woke culture is able to identify, right? You as a woke culture person are really in touch with the insecurities of the groups that you care about, right? The groups that you care about, right? LGBT people, racial minorities, certain types of people in poverty, but you're not in touch with the insecurities, or you dismiss the insecurities that are leading people to vote for Trump. And the insecurities that lead people to vote for certain Democrats and there are insecurities that lead people to vote for certain Republicans and become biased, and they are not the same, and they should not be think they're equal, and we should not equate outcome, but it is at the end of the day a very similar psychology.
So you teach students and critical thinking. Somebody who sits in the middle of all of this random, chaos that's going on at all times. The way the news is reported now. There's it's not one or the other. It's all the shades of gray in between. So how does a person who has critical thinking skills, or how do they develop their critical thinking skills against these biases they might see or have around them?
I am a person that really, as a teacher, I am here for people who are here who want to learn, and I'm helping you, right? I'm helping you be wise in the world. And then on the other hand, I do research about how we can welcome people and change and stuff and do all the persuasion stuff. But in this situation, and anybody who's listening to this podcast is a person who wants to learn and wants to be wise in the world. So here is my advice to you if you want to be wise in the world. For your behavior. Imperfect, but a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago, we would sit around reading a newspaper, some of us, on a Saturday morning with a coffee. We'd spend an hour with a newspaper, maybe we'd spend an hour with The Economist or a different magazine every week. When I was in graduate school, I read the Wall Street Journal every single weekend, right? And I gave myself time to think about it. I read things that I disagreed with. I was in this calm learning state. Because when I was going to get my information, I was going to get my information in a way that I could process it and think about it properly. Most people read their news while sitting on a toilet, and they read in the length of a Twitter. And so what I would suggest to you, and let's see, I can pull out my phone. So here's my phone. I don't know if you guys can see it. I don't read news on my phone, and if I ever read news on my phone, I put it in an incognito browser. The only thing I read on my phone, it's going to go to a rap music video.
Wait, what's an incognito browser?
It means that Google doesn't track it. At least it doesn't make effect. So my news feed, because when I'm in line, I don't want to read about politics because I know that that's not a space for me to actually learn anything about politics. And also, almost every single headline is misleading, even these headlines about sneakers and Star Wars. And so I don't know if you can see, but this is just, I love sneakers. So we got sneakers. I love television. So here's something about The Crown, Dragon Ball. And I will read sometimes basic science stuff on this that is non-political. So here's something about black hole. Here's something about Godzilla. Here's something about Haley Williams, the rocker. Here's something about soccer. So that's my newsfeed, right? Because when I am standing in line for Shake Shack, that's what I should be reading. I shouldn't be reading whatever thing in 2-minute bites, right? So take time, sit down, and do it. And that way you can also think about, okay, well, I'm going to read the Wall Street Journal for a couple weeks. I'm going to read The Economist for a couple weeks. I'm going to read this other thing for a couple weeks. I haven't read any articles on everyday feminism for a while. I'm going to go read a couple things there, right? And so make time to simulate to some degree the time with the newspaper.
How important is it that you hear no when you're developing ideas?
So I think that one of the greatest things about getting a PhD is more or less for 5 years, the smartest people in the world tell you no, right? You're wrong. Good try, Troy, but you're wrong. So I think it's really important that we learn no, because we really need to know, we really need to be okay with being wrong. And there are so many things about our culture, and I would say that potentially woke academic culture is the worst at this. You're wrong, right? Like, I don't go up to my students and say, oh, you don't understand loss aversion's difference from endowment effect? Wow, you're a terrible, horrible person. Please never talk to me again. And once you learn it, you should feel shame for the next 2 years that you didn't know that. But culture will do that if the person doesn't know the difference between two biases that are related to race. But they're psychologically the same kind of concepts. The other thing that school does really badly is school is set up right now that if you get a bad grade in third week on your first midterm, which is what's going to happen in the quarter system as a freshman, that grade will take you until you are a senior in your entire life. It will be reflected in your GPA on your college resume. That is not a good space to be in, right? And make that even worse on multiple choice tests and other things like that. Those are not good spaces to be in. Here's one thing I do with my students. So I'm in a very privileged position. I teach very intelligent upper division business students at a great university, the University of Oregon. But think of it if you're teaching how you might approximate this. I don't grade the students' homework. And so what I do is if they do it, they get credit for it. And obviously they're going to test and obviously they're going to have projects. And if they want feedback on it, they can come talk to me in office hours and they can put it on my desk and I'll give them feedback on how they're doing it well or not. Because I don't want my students to ever worry about really being wrong on creative, critical thinking. I want them to explore and I never want them to rush. So if I give them 3 problems to do, which is like design something for Disney, but they're really struggling or they have a really good idea for the first one, I want them to focus on that. And there's some real imperfections of how that system works. But again, creating a culture where people have the time to be wrong is really important.
Can you tell me, for people who don't know, what is woke culture?
Woke culture, as is often referred to, is this idea of liberals who are aware of all the social justice problems, all the different things. Now, woke is often sometimes used by is used less, but is sometimes used by people who are on the other side of the political spectrum. Like, you're not aware of how the system, right? Get woke, right? Wake yourself from the matrix. Take the red pill, right? But woke, as I mean it, and the most common, is this idea of a liberal society. And so much of it is good, right? I love so much about it, right? Childish Gambino in his most famous song, Red Bone, says, stay woke in it, right? It's all, there's so much good stuff in it. But there's just some problematic aspects to it. There's sort of 3 levels in which people get things wrong. The first level is that they don't really care. They're just trying to look great, right? The other thing is they do care, but they're not doing enough, and they're not smart enough. And then there's something sort of in between that, right? And so what I think woke culture has multiple problems, like anything has, is that there's some people who are there for the wrong reasons, and there's some people who don't understand everything, right? The joke, of course, about woke culture, which has been made before the word woke, is freshman goes into first social justice-y type class, learns something they didn't know the day before, and the next day criticizes everyone like they're the devil for not knowing the thing that they just learned, right?
Yeah.
And so that's an example of it. And so there's that, but then there's also the problem is that they learn the thing and they think they know enough, right? And so what I like to say about people is people who are woke are often what I like to call, let's just use this example. It's using way too many stereotypes that are kind of problematic, but it illustrates it. But it is that people who are woke are sometimes gym smart. And what that means is you've all been to a gym where there is somebody who is not a very smart person, but they know everything about how to build muscle, right? And I think that woke people often are that, right? They know so many things because they've read so many articles on everydayfeminism.com, which we all should. But they don't know how basic logic structures work. They don't know the complexity of issues. They don't know that shouting at somebody doesn't always change their belief. They don't understand that institutionalization is often a bigger problem than unconscious bias, or is a additional complexity in the system, right? And so there's this problematic thing is that people are woke, but really they're just gym smart, or they're woke, but their logic is broke, or their logic has never existed because, and I'll go on my rant on education, we don't really teach people how to think.
This is a split second in time. It's, it seems like a radical period that we're living through right now. Mm-hmm. Are you optimistic for, getting back on track, whatever that means?
Without using the word optimism, I will just say this. Humankind, for the last 100 years, with a couple blips, has been getting better and better and better and better and better. We've made an insane amount of progress. Remember that Barack Obama did not publicly support gay marriage defined as marriage when he was a candidate, right? We have made huge progress in the United States of America and the world. Underneath all this like negativity and terrible Trumpian and racism and all these things are people who are literally checking everydayfeminism.com on the daily. Now, I have problems with them, but they're doing really good things. They're learning. There is this huge concept, though some people hate the term, of metamodernism. And metamodernism is the idea is that postmodernism was like everything is a copy of a copy of a copy. It's all fake. Nothing's real. And metamodernism is like, okay, we got that postmodern. You're done. Now what can we do with it? And so it's like a hopeful postmodernism. And so there's this happy culture underneath. There's like this counterculture to the main thing happening right now. Sometimes it's called hope punk and other things like that. And I see a lot of that, and that is good. But I think that we always have to remember this, and this is horrible and the cold business person saying this. Again, I could never be a politician. If you are a business and you increase sales by 3% next year, that is an amazing accomplishment in almost all business situations. If you are a world and you reduce racism by 3% next year, that should be thought of as not enough, terrible that it's not going to get better, but that is the realism, right? And I'm unsure because I'm at the end of the day, I'm a lab scientist whose real job is to say, if you have a goal, here's the technique to get to the goal. It's hard for me to assess like the state of the world. I'm not a sociologist. I'm not an economist. I'm not a political economist. But I think in lots and lots of ways that we are not seeing, the world is getting better at the same time that it looks like it's getting bad, right? And that is good, right? There are so many more people who want to do something about climate change today than last time, right? I have this research project that was done 5 years ago on climate change. And if we've talked about replicating that study today, but if we were to detect the same psychological thing, we'd have to probably change a lot because so many people are generally on board, at least with the idea of climate change, that there's not so much denial of the fact. Now, maybe the president of the United States is, but at the same time, but if you look at the polling data, it's not, right? And you can find polls that suggest horrible things and other things and bad, and we could run into World War III tomorrow. But that, as a person who likes to add something to the conversation and cannot be conclusive on this, because again, I'm a psychologist, not a political philosopher who knows all the sociological data, that's what I'd say.
Great. You had books you wanted to recommend. Tell us.
So in following up on this stuff as a good, education person, I'd love people to read. So I have an article that's called Team Science that came out in Skeptical Inquirer. It goes through a lot of ideas. It really is this idea on how do you welcome people into a movement. So I call it Welcome to Team Hero. I also have an article in Scientific America called Who Are You Calling Anti-Science?, which looks at the people who deny facts or science and talks about how the fact that they really aren't anti-science is most people believe most science and in certain situations don't for certain reasons. I also really recommend that if you're just looking to get smart and understand psychology, I'm biased, but I love my dissertation advisor, Dan Ariely's book, Predictably Irrational. In my opinion, it's one of the best pop psychology books ever made because it goes through the experiments. So not only are you going to learn factoids, you're actually going to learn about thinking. There's also if you want to learn more about probabilistic thinking, causality, and philosophy, Wireless Philosophy, which is now partnered with the Khan Academy, is a really good website. And if you just want to go on the other side, half of my life is spent talking about how horrible life is and how we can make it better through activism. But the other side of my life is how do we make Disney or your experience or just a date that you're going on awesome. And there's an amazing article called How to Design Happiness in Fast Company, which you can Google and you'll see the Disney principles that they do. And you can really adopt those. And one of my favorite things to do in class with my students is I teach them this thing about climate change, right? And how we increase climate change. Or teach them about how to design Disney better. But then I also have them say, okay, well, how can you convince your relative to be nicer to your sibling, right? Because you can use the same principles that we use over here in this climate change persuasion stuff. Oh, how are you going to make your next Friday party as awesome as a Disney ride? Oh, you're going to use a portal. You're going to use this storytelling thing, one ride, one emotion kind of concepts. And so it's really good.
Excellent.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for watching or listening. Don't forget to subscribe and click like and click here for the next episode.